CMMS Radio talks about all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, focused on maintenance management. It's the people, the process, and the culture that make your CMMS journey a success. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Today, we have a long overdue episode. I say that all the time, but I like to bring in the heavy hitters, people that are out here in this game of maintenance management, asset performance management, all that stuff. You know, that's really what I'm after. So today we are meeting with Marc Laplante. He is with Hexagon Asset Lifecycle Intelligence. He and I spent some time together at the Streamline Conference recently down in Greenville, South Carolina. We had some cool talks. We just didn't have any time to sit down and record our episode at the event because he was so busy. What happens at these conferences, and you can confirm this, Marc, is you're walking around and every few feet you get stopped. You get in these great conversations. It's not about doing business. It's about what kind of things have you been solving? What have you been dealing with? And then people start picking your brain on the things you know about. So first of all, before I ask you my lead out question, welcome to CMMS Radio.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you said spending time with you in Streamline. You know, the other distraction is a lot of really great papers that our customers are there to give, right?
Yeah.
People who are actually really doing it. So, that's probably the biggest distraction for me is just visiting with customers and sitting in on their papers and seeing how we can help them move the ball forward. So it was a great time, and I was grateful for the chance to talk with you. All those many moments where we say, "Hey, let's get together." But I'm glad we get set aside the time today. So thanks, Greg.
Yeah. In fact, I was doing. I call them walk and talks. I'll be walking around trying to get a little bit of B-roll, and I walked in on the workshop, and like almost right away, I was like, no, I got to get out of here. People are already kind of digging in and learning about their ISO 55000 from you, and this is something that you're really plugged into. And by the way, just a quick shout out to one, Reliability X, George Williams, Angelica Williams, Dan Anderson. They brought a nice rig for me at the conference so I could do all those podcast episodes that are in post-production right now. I also want to give a huge shout out to Alex Bolin and the team at Digital Thinker for putting on such an amazing event.
Streamline conferences. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Very focused on community rather than this idea of selling stuff. And it really went well. Everybody did that. And it's something you don't see that often. So that was cool. Now, here's the question. Why and how is ISO 55000 so important in the world of maintenance management, asset performance management, for a guy like me that doesn't know a ton about it, kind of on purpose? And why does it matter to CMMS or otherwise?
So why ISO 55001 really matters in the domain of asset management and all those other things that you've mentioned, and there's plenty of other things that we didn't mention that are all kind of, in there, is that unlike quality management, unlike environmental management or human resources or finance, asset management simply doesn't have a permanent seat at the boardroom table. And so ISO 55000 series of standards is meant to not only bring a framework of what we could consider, minimum standards around what an asset management system is, but whether they realize it or not, the board of directors, top management, and all these people that sit around the boardroom table, they are completely dependent on the performance of their assets, how much they cost to perform, about the care and feeding of those assets, and what we do at the operational level. So organizations from the top floor to the shop floor are inextricably dependent on the performance of those assets. So that's what the ISO 55000 family of standards brings, is the framework that it needs to have that consistent line of sight between top management and at the operational level.
So with that, one of the things I've often wanted to ask you in particular is, are there environments, potential clients out there that should not be looking at those standards as a way forward to further improve their organization? And then who should actually be looking at that and incorporating that into how they manage the data as it relates to the assets that are on the shop floor for overall organizational health and wellness.
So we wrote the standards to be as broadly applicable as possible, right? So you can imagine you've got, dozens of people from dozens of countries, right? Most of whom don't speak English as their first language, right? Coming together and trying to build this set of standards that is as broadly applicable across as many different types of organization, operating contexts, and cultures as possible. So, my initial thought, the answer to that question was like, everyone should, of course, right? Because, I helped write it, right? But there is a clause within the scope of that standard that says, it depends on the size and complexity of the organization. So in the workshop, I was using examples such as, a military organization, right? Lots of assets, right? Or a church bus, right, for a local congregation. That church bus is a very important asset for them, right, because it's aligned and consistent with what they are trying to accomplish as an organization. So we can look at those two extremes. Now, would I suggest that all these local congregations with the church bus, comply to ISO 55000? Certainly not, right? But to the degree to which it's applicable, to be able to maintain a view of risk, cost, and performance of those assets in realizing value from those assets in service to achieving organizational objectives, right? So if that's what an organization is trying to achieve, then the ISO 55000 family of standards is completely applicable, either as a resource or as a framework to move forward and to certify to.
Would it then be also related to their maintenance maturity? For example, when an organization, big, small, or somewhere in the middle, has these critical assets, but they're not even very far along on their, nowadays it's digitization, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not as strong on their documentation or ability to look into their documentation. Maybe it still lives on paper, maybe it still lives on spreadsheets. Are those types of organizations that are going to turn the corner? And let's say, for example, they're becoming a Hexagon user.
Mm-hmm.
Would that naturally suggest that they're probably going to lean on those standards more so than someone that's going with like a smaller basic work order system?
I would answer that question saying that let's separate the technology from the management system, right? Because when you think about these standards in 55,001, the ones that I mentioned, 14,001 and 9,001, when I was driving by Charlotte, North Carolina, there's a big Firestone plant there, and they've got a big banner. It says we are 9,001 compliant, we're 14,001 compliant, right?
Yeah.
There's space underneath it for 55,001, right? But those have little to do. The focus isn't on the technology, right? The focus is on the processes, right? The framework, the policies, the support from leadership, the resource definition. So when you look at the framework of the 55,000 set of standards, the top part of the framework, from organizational objectives through policy through strategic asset management plan, these are all things that are on paper, right? People that need to think, they need to noodle, they need to get to some consensus on all of those things. Then you move into asset management plans, and now you start thinking, okay, how are we going to actually pull off this plan, right? What are the enabling capabilities that we're going to need in terms of processes and technology and people, right? And so that's when it's at the lower level of the framework where we start making considerations as how we're going to do this and what tools, people, and processes are we going to need to get this done. And you can start as simple as you can start very, very simply, because it's also meant to be an iterative, a recursive process of continuous improvement, right? So start small, start with a small scope, right? And then as you mature, right, the framework is meant to help you mature as you move along. It's kind of like an exercise program, right?
Yeah.
If I'm more morbidly obese, and I'm going to my health is going to suffer as a result. Oftentimes you see some really inspirational programs of people who just started with just taking a walk around their property, right? And doing that and just obligating themselves to that, making a promise to themselves is to obligate themselves to start with taking a walk, right?
Yeah.
And then a year later you see them just in a really inspirational success story that is that they're on their journey and ongoing success, and they got improvement to move on. But I mean, it's that's what the 55,000 standards is meant to do, is help you get started, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
then also show you how to continuously improve with a very simple framework to do it with.
I think that's where, like, when I ask the question, I want to be real kind of babe in the woods, don't know anything, those kind of questions, because it can be really helpful. I think there's confusion out there how frameworks and standardization really does, in fact, present that opportunity, but we sometimes get either resistance or a lot of misunderstanding. Even like I kind of tried to tie it to the technology, where you're able to say, well, wait a second, technology
Mhm.
aside, this is standardization that actually is not technology dependent. It's people and process dependent. And that's, so I'm taking a shot here that the value of such standardization is that it eliminates the quote unquote guesswork as to how we're moving forward together as an entire organization towards that
Correct.
continual process improvement. And that's where I think people sometimes are either confused or misinformed as to what the value really is to that standardization. So the example you give about something like weight loss, because
Mhm.
you're going to be potentially at a health risk, you need some form of standardization and discipline against that standardization to in fact reach your initial goals. And then you also mentioned the iterative nature of
Mhm.
these standards. It means you're not going in, hey, I got to do all of it. You're going in, well, here's where we start. This is why. Where do organizations start with their own assessment as to how and why this would apply to them in your view? What would you suggest somebody does to kind of start out and figure out whether they really need to look at this or not?
Couple things. First of all, our technical committee has a lot of really great resources. And of course, I'll make this distinction. I'm employed by Hexagon. They support my activities and my ongoing participation with the technical committee. I also make money by selling some great software, right? So that's the one hat. The hat I'm wearing right now is from as a contributing member to the TC 251 technical committee, which has a really terrific website with really terrific resources that are completely agnostic. I know a lot of us vendors, we like to write white papers and try to present them as agnostic. Well, this is really truly a website that has some really terrific resources, insights, and thought leadership around asset management and how these standards apply to all of that. Lots of use cases in multiple languages, right? A lot of video clips of people who have done it successfully across
Mhm.
a range of industries. And guess what? You don't even have to put in it's not behind a sign-in wall, right? You don't even have to register with your with your email address or any of that stuff. You just go in and you can just browse and download copies of these great resources. And so I would suggest starting there. Second thing I would suggest very strongly to do is to get a copy of the first three standards: 55,000, 55,001, and 55,002, because 55,000 is the introduction to the asset management system, and it offers a lot of insights as to what you could do to bring in an asset management system.
Mhm.
55,002 offers all the things of these are all the things that you should do. And then 55,001, which is the requirements standard, has all of these specifications around what you shall do or what you must do to be compliant, right? So could, should, and shall. So those first three documents, starting off with 55,002, because most of this audience will be familiar with asset management. At least they'll have a very strong mental model of what they believe asset management is. 55,002. And this is, my personal opinion. Some of my committee colleagues would say, oh, well, you should start them at 55,000. I think 55,002 has has a great deal more uh, suggestive guidance, because that's what it is. It's a guidance standard. How do you apply um, the standards to your asset management system? How do you get from where you are to being a compliant organization? It has a lot of guidance and annexes and case studies, right? So it really helps you understand, the the applicability of ISO 55001 as a standard. The second thing that it helps really clearly understand is the relationship between asset management, the asset management system, and the assets themselves, right?
Mm.
Special relationship between those three levels of the asset management system, right? Or of asset management. So there's some important clarity. And during the workshop, the one thing that I tried to establish right from the beginning was that the asset management system that we'll be referring to during this 4-day workshop that we did in one day is we're talking about the asset management system, not the EAM solution that you're using, right? Trying to make the distinction and break that part of people's mental model. The asset management system isn't the software that you're using, right? It's the management system that you use to realize value from assets as you seek to achieve your strategic objectives as an organization.
Yeah. Thus,
The third suggestion I'll do is that, depending on, I'm sure your listeners are from all over the world, but there are some really great organizations, such as in South America, there's Abraman, right, which is a collection of organizations similar to the SMRP, right, that we have here in the United States, the Society of Maintenance and Reliability Professionals. There's equivalent organizations in South America, and they all kind of roll up to one Latin American, South American organization called Abraman. In Canada, there's an organization called PMAC, PEMAC. Really terrific organization. A great learning program, a great and growing body of knowledge. Also a sibling or a cousin, or to SMRP and Opperman. There's a similar organization in Japan, similar organization over in Europe, and of course, European countries have their own organizations related to asset management. So I would encourage organizations and people who are listening to this, that to be interested in getting into the next level of understanding of the difference between asset management and managing assets, get involved in a chapter meeting. The Institute of Asset Management is present in many parts of the world, including the US and Canada, and of course throughout the UK and Europe. Australia has a very, very strong presence, asset management community of practice. And so I would encourage people to go to those communities of practice, and look for resources, contacts, and people to network with to augment their knowledge and light a path to where they need to go. Right.
yeah, and that right there is what we're really doing here, is lighting a
Mm-hmm.
path. It's
Yeah.
what we're promoting are best practices as it relates to these assets. In the end,
Mm-hmm.
without assets functioning, within their design intent and all this throughput, without that, we're really stuck. And when we started off, you were kind of talking about something, and I put a clip out earlier today from something I'm editing down with Andy Gager,
Mm-hmm.
when he was talking about the boardroom and this idea that, all of you here, what you do doesn't make the organization money. It's what's on the plant floor. It's the
Mm-hmm.
assets. It's those people that are running raw materials and, producing something that we need to continue to produce so that we have something to sell. And that should be something that's really good and high quality, and on like
Mm-hmm.
this. And getting back to these standards, um, I, I think the other question I want to kind of ask about that is, are there opportunities for, I'm going to use the word deviation from incorporating these standards? And what I'm really getting at is sometimes it can be intimidating for someone to adopt a standard when some of those standards don't make sense to their operation and how their business runs and thrives already. Does that question make kind of some sense? Like, are there exceptions to the rules within the framework of ISO 55000 standards where do you have to hit 1 through 10? Can you make an exception on number 7 kind of a thing? Does that kind of jive or make sense?
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Yeah, because I've had plenty of conversations about this over the years, and even prior to the original set of standards being published back in 2014. I had more often than not, I had people say, "Yeah, I think we're going to look at part of the standard and try to implement that." And I'm like, that kind of defeats the purpose, right? Because there's inextricable alignment between each of the high level structure of the standard. So, either do it or don't,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Now, what it's meant to do is that, people are already doing that. They're investing heavily, for instance, in condition monitoring, right? And I think that's awesome because I started off my career in condition monitoring. Condition monitoring has been around for a long time,
Hmm.
right? And when we look at wearable devices, for instance, right? I've got an Apple Watch that I use, and when I'm exercising, yeah. How do we typically use these Apple Watches? We don't really, the average person, I don't think really uses them to their full potential, right? But how the Apple Watch got really popular was that there was a guy called Kevin Foley. He was going to go see a movie in Texas one night, and all of a sudden his watch said, "Hey, you're in trouble. You're in danger. You're possibly in danger of atrial defibrillation. Go get medical attention." And he did, and he was in danger because of that very thing that his Apple Watch detected. So that's a happy story with a happy ending, and it was also very great marketing for Apple. So when we take that principle and we apply it to our assets, and we're putting an Apple Watch on all of our assets, are we just waiting for the alarm to go off? Right? Because in Kevin Foley's case, if he didn't have the watch on, you might have suffered, a debilitation or death, right? Very likely. The same thing with our assets, right? Are we just buying a little bit of time to react sooner, right, before the thing, falls apart?
Hmm.
Or are we trying to get ahead and stay ahead of those failures? So are we going to use the sensor data? Am I going to use my Apple Watch to get ahead of the things that threaten my health or take away from my longevity and take away from my well-being and energy levels? Am I going to get ahead and mitigate those and stay ahead of those things, right? And so
Yeah.
the standard brings a whole new level of mentality. It's not about, reacting, applying condition monitoring and vibration and oil analysis and thermography, and then being reactive faster with more time to react, right? It's about, let's look at your deficiencies, your nonconformities. Do you have the right resources? Do you have the right tech? Are you selecting the right technologies, right? Because it's about realizing value from assets, right? And so
Yeah.
getting ahead of these types of deficiencies, failure modes, degradation mechanisms, vulnerabilities, if you will, getting ahead and staying ahead of those, right? So it's not about applying some of the standard. It's about applying the entirety of the standard,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there's the horizontal applicability, right, between departments at the operational level, but also, right, how do you apply part of a standard and ignore the integrated applicability of the standard? Because when you look at, and I'll encourage people to go and visit our resources website. We have one of my colleagues, Lori. She gives a short 2-minute video on why asset management policy is so important. That's right near the very top of the high level structure of the standard. And she says, because it gets top leadership to commit to the execution, their leadership, their accountability, transparency, and then the weight and leadership that they add to the success of the asset management system, right? And
Yeah.
so, like I say, you could think you're applying part of the standard, but without the alignment horizontally and then vertically, from top floor to shop floor, and you're not really applying part of the standard. You're just doing something that might be interesting or helpful,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's no such thing as applying part of a standard. Right?
And
Keeping in mind, I said the standards are minimum requirements, right? Feel free to exceed them. Right?
yeah, yeah. And I I like the way you explained it because I don't want to do too much guesswork and make too many generalizations when I'm not an expert in this particular area, but I hear about it. I've helped people with it a little bit, but always said, "Hey, I'm not an expert on that, but we can get you talking to the right people on condition monitoring." This
Mhm.
I'm out here seeing all the different condition monitoring and AI and all this stuff, and I think
Mhm.
one of the most important things is that contextual data as it relates to the right kind of condition monitoring that actually tells you something useful rather than triggering false alarms or all this. Do you right
Mhm.
here, do you still see that a lot of available condition monitoring technology that's out there, wireless sensors, let's say we're going to focus on that, is surface level only, doesn't deliver the impact that it really could or purports to? I want to ask someone like you so that we get more of a bit of color around those ideas I talk about, where be really careful with who you're connecting with and actually connecting all these sensors in your environments that might be overkill, unnecessary, or will actually fail you and set you up for further failure. I want to get an opinion from someone like you on that.
Yeah. So when you think of an iterative process, a recursive process, and I always use the plan, do, check, act, right? Is that the beauty about that simple model is, first of all, it's generally acceptable. Most people understand it. People are familiar with it, right? And it's recursive by nature. And so when we look at the topic and consider the topic of condition monitoring, and predictive maintenance and all the AI capabilities that help supercharge some of these applications. When you look at plan, do, check, act on the face of a clock, between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock position is where you're doing the checking. That's where condition monitoring generally, maps to on the plan, do, check, act cycle. The important thing to consider when you're trying to filter through the types of condition monitoring and anomaly detection and sensor-based algorithms, right, is what kind of decisions are you going to make, right? When you go from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, what are you going to do, say, do, or decide, right? What actions are you going to take based on what that information is telling you, right? What are the kinds of decisions that information, that monitoring technology is going to allow you to do that you can't currently do? So, perfect example. Let's go back to Apple Watch, right? Um, when I'm training, I'm doing Olympic lifting, right? And you're doing a set, and you got to pause between sets, obviously, and do some type of recovery. I would often look around the gym and I would wonder what makes people rest as long as they do, right? Or as short as they do. What is the criteria for the amount of time that someone takes during their rest between sets? For me, I had just set an arbitrary 2 minutes, right? Initially. And then it struck me that I could use the sensor that's on my wrist as I'm working out. And instead of just an arbitrary 2 minutes, which I had just picked out of the air, I decided, oh, well, when my heart rate gets to below a certain level, at or below a certain level, now I'm ready for my next set,
Hmm.
right? And that could have been 2 minutes, it could have been a minute, could have been 3 minutes, who knows, right? I didn't track that, right? But I decided I'm going to wait until my recovery is expressed in terms of beats per minute rather than just some arbitrary number, right? And so when you apply something that's considerably more complex in the area of condition monitoring, let's face it, things like vibration analysis have been around for a very long time, right? And AI is only making it better, right, and more precise. And so the question is, yes, you can get lost trying to decide, who do I buy from? What sensors do I install on my equipment? The real question is, what kind of decisions are you going to make when you take this first lap around the track, right? And then as you gather information, you make decisions, you start mapping out and forecasting some of the other decisions that we're going to need to make. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, we'll probably need to bring in meteorological data, or we'll need to bring in some other type of sensor-based analytics, or maybe we need to bring in, pressure, speed, temperature, those types of things, actual manufacturing process from the MES, right? Because what you're trying to do is get a complete context. It's not about condition monitoring. It's about understanding the full context of your asset, whether it be from EAM transactional data, whether it be from time series data from your process historian, or whether it be from vibration, thermography, or other types of sensor-based analytics. So I hope that answers your question. It really is about what questions are you trying to answer, what visibility are you trying to improve, and what decisions, what level of quality of decisions you want to make that you're currently not able to make.
Yeah, it does answer the question. And a follow up on that it's kind of a tough one, but is there, I like to call these hard questions, not for you, but could you share like a really hard telling by the answer question that potential clients of condition monitoring, and sensor organizations could ask that vendor to really, in a sense, put them on the spot so that they can understand if they're talking to the right vendor?
Sure. And I think some of the answers lie within 55,002, the text, right? So, what are you measuring and monitoring, first of all? And then, what are you going to do with that information?
Mm-hmm.
And in clause number 10 is, how are you going to use that information to improve, right? And so, maybe I'll answer the question from a broader context, and I'll come back and answer it more specifically to your question. One of the things that, and one of the reasons why I got the Alex at Streamline conferences to give me a slot before the conference was so that I could get the workshop participants to calibrate their mental model about what asset management is and what is an asset management system, and how are those relationships tied to their assets,
Mm-hmm.
right? Before they go into a conference that's about EAM and APM and J5 and AKMS and all these wonderful tools and the wonderful partners that we have to implement these tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I want. And so our former chair, Reese Davies of the technical committee, he was with us for 13, 14, 15 years as the chair of the committee. He once said during I think it was during a conference, he said, any organization that's looking to buy a piece of software like an EAM system should actually do an ISO 55001 audit or survey, right? Start with that, because going through an evaluation on how close or how far are you from being compliant to ISO 55000 is a really, really great way of helping you pick what applications should I put in place in order to enable my asset management system. So it
Yeah.
really helps to narrow down your choices before you go to the market, right? And so as I move, back, more closer to the specific answer to your question, I fear I might have kind of lost the the question to begin with, because I went a little bit broader and figuring I could come back and answer your more narrow question. Um, but I understand the basis of your question, because today, I mean, there are more solutions out there than any other time in human history. I mean, it's just mind-boggling, right? And and frankly, some of them have been around for a long time. They just have, a machine learning or an AI wrapper, a gift wrap around it, saying, "Hey, it's got AI now, so it's got to be great. It's got to be better than it ever was."
Yeah.
Um, you know, so I think to answer that question is, walk yourself through the standard, and then walk your team through plan, do, check, act, and start with the 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock position. Say, What kind of visibility do we need from our asset management system that we currently don't have?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if we had it, what kind of decisions would we be able to make that we currently can't make at our level and at levels above and below where we are? So whether you're operational or top management, right? And how will the information that we need that gives us that visibility help us to continually compound our collective understanding about how we care for and feed our assets, right? To make sure that they're safely being operated at the lowest sustainable cost, right?
Yeah.
So we can maximize production while being able to observe risk, right? And so I would say take that approach first because let's face it, I mean, I have a lot of interactions, many times during the week, and I ask those types of questions, right? It happened just yesterday around this time of day. I said, this is all great. I can show you our technology. We can talk about how it integrates to this and that and the other thing, right? But I said, if the solution was in place and working well, how would you know? Right? It's
Yeah.
just really simple questions. It really is, table stakes, right? If the solution was in place, how would you know? I mean, how would you know you've been successful, right?
Yeah.
And the people I was speaking with yesterday, they were very very sharp about it. And they said, yeah, well, we need to have a better view of what risk looks like, right? Because we don't know how much asset risk we're exposed to. And yes, condition monitoring and those types of things are applicable to that, right? But you're not asking the right questions, right? What risk are we exposed to? Um, what's an acceptable level of tolerable risk that we need to get to, right? How do we protect our assets in order to maintain and sustain that level of risk tolerance? How do we protect them through activities, through condition monitoring, through utilization of technology like AI? And how do we get the full context? And how do we know that that strategy that we develop to protect our assets isn't fully implemented and all the switches are in the on position, right? Some of those will be, we got condition monitoring. Some of them will be, we got time series data that we're concerned about. Some of it will be, we got inspection data or operator rounds or frontline connected worker data coming in, right? Some of that will be meteorological data, right? So yeah, literally coming full circle because I just walked from 6 o'clock all the way back to
Yeah.
6 o'clock again in the plan, do, check, act cycle. So hopefully that answers the question because I mean,
I,
to
I,
be able to talk through all the different categories of products that are out there and all the different types of technology that's being used. And I mean, some of it, and I guess the one thing I'll caution people on, especially on the artificial intelligence side of things. And you might want to go to my blog and read my 4-part series on artificial intelligence and asset management to help build a mental model, right? To help build a filter. Is that you really got to know what you're getting into, right? Because some of the promises that are being made by vendors um, will require quite a significant lift and quite a significant data operations um, dependency, and perhaps a level of data architecture that you perhaps don't have, right? So know what you're getting into, right? So we could probably talk about this for quite a while. So I'll just
I'm
pause
sure.
there. And
So
Greg, you tell me.
you did, and the whole idea behind what I'm asking and trying to come up with what folks could be asking their potential vendors
Mhm.
is just getting a little bit better at sussing out, so to speak, who the right vendors are that you should be working with, who you should be listening to. And I like the idea of kind of putting those folks to the test.
Mhm.
And what I mean by putting them to the test is getting a real sense of what they know about you and the outcome you're trying to achieve, your business, rather
Mhm.
than maybe a focus on selling their wares. Because there's a big difference between those two closely related things. We all
Mhm.
understand we're providing services and products and technologies, and we're making great things that everybody can buy, and on like this. But sometimes there are vendors out there that know how to sell what they have as opposed
Mm,
to really get to those outcomes. And I think for clients seeking an outcome, be a little bit steadfast and almost staunch about what you're asking for, and be suspicious might not be the right word. Be in a
mm,
position to scrutinize what you're hearing, and don't be afraid to kind of trust your gut as to whether these individuals know what they're talking about or not, because the real deal vendors out there, regardless of what their goals are when it comes to making a sale and bringing in the technology and making quota
mm,
and all that good stuff in
mm,
some way, right? They are typically not going to be afraid of any question you could ask them, no matter how uncomfortable it makes them, because at the end of the day, they need to know how they're coming through for you, because without any of that, we don't get any of the goodness that comes from these technologies or that come from these standards that we can leverage if we really leverage them top to bottom to improve
mm.
our organization. And that's the goal. So I think it's it's good what you said. It helps people. It gives them clues as to where they could go to first educate themselves and have a better awareness of what they're dialoguing, what they're talking about with these potential vendors, and vice versa. I encourage vendors to just constantly know more and more about who you serve, why you serve them, what's really going on, and also the cookie cutter approach. Forget about it. The fear,
No,
uncertainty,
yeah.
and doubt. Forget about all that. Get to the hearts of the matters and all that. So I want to switch you into, so it's your first time on CMMS radio, and we've covered a lot. So I want to switch to the fun segment if you're cool with that, and just have you
That's
knock
totally
down
cool.
3 fun questions,
All right.
no wrong answers,
Okay.
and we'll
Good.
start. Yeah, no wrong answers. So and you can swear if you want to. First fun question is, what is your favorite music?
And I could have answered that, easily a few years ago. My favorite music is, I would have to say, rock and heavy metal, guitar heavy music, right? Um, when I was very young, like we're talking like the early 80s, Rush was my favorite band. They
Okay.
became my favorite band, continue to be my favorite band. Um, Little River Band is another one. Doobie Brothers, Metallica, Van Halen, you name it. So yeah, if I had my choice, I'd be listening, very closely to rock, heavy metal. But I also like, fantastic talents like Chris Stapleton. If I had, genie in a bottle popped up and say 3 wishes, I said one of them would definitely, I want a singing voice like Chris Stapleton, right? And the ability to play guitar while singing like Chris Stapleton. So that's my
Yeah.
that's answer number one. Hopefully, as concise as possible. Yeah,
Well done. And I
yeah.
love the answer because,
I can see the background there. Absolutely.
fun question number 2. What is
Hmm.
your favorite sport or hobby? And on the sport, it doesn't have to be one that you currently play. It could be one you like to root for and kind of follow.
Weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting.
Nice. Nice.
Um, Very very close second, and sometimes they switch. Is wrestling and combat sports. The reason why I like weightlifting is because no one will ever win. Gravity will always win, right? And it is about being a continually improving, marginally improving daily, weekly. Because if you think about, some of these Olympic lifters and the amount of weight that they can violently throw overhead and hold that load until the buzzer goes off, you have to be a superb technician, right? And it those lifts are a result of continuous improvement and honing. And again, no one's ever going to win. Gravity always will, and the loads might get heavier, which means that our technique and our honing and our study of the craft will have to improve along with it. in order to get to those heavier lifts and breaking those records and so on. It's just wonderful to watch. I just love it.
Nice. Nice. Here's the big one. No wrong
All right.
answers.
All
What
right.
is your philosophy, perspective, opinion, anything at all when it comes to this concept of work-life balance?
Work-life balance. Well, so I mean, I embrace, clearly I embrace asset management in a pretty substantial way. Hexagon pays me a salary to do what I do. But I do commit time, outside of the normal workday, to increase skills, perhaps revisit those skills that I hadn't touched in a while. So, for instance, if you're getting on a path, just for instance, and this is what I'm doing, to continually develop and augment skills in artificial intelligence and actually be able to roll up your sleeves and put your hands on it and be able to utilize that type of technology, right? Well, part of my learning path that I'm following right now is revisiting linear algebra and statistics, high school and college level, right? And in those of you listening, if you understand what a GPT is, right, you know exactly why vectors applies to that, and linear algebra directly applies to deep learning models like a GPT. So I spend hours a week, revisiting old skills and honing those, but also, embracing and really reaching to develop and augment my skills and in the area of AI. But besides that, I also spend time, every morning, top priority. I spend an hour in Bible study. I spend One of the promises I've made myself is to spend at least 15 minutes a day on guitar, right? And then the rest of the time, of course, is spending time with my adult children and their wives, and preparing to be a granddad here in a few months.
Nice.
So, yeah.
That's no wrong answers, because it's always somehow, for me, it's always fascinating. I don't know if you can tell, but my cheeks hurt right now because I'm so happy and smiling about our
Mm-hmm.
interaction today on this episode, but also hearing those things. I think it matters. I think it matters to somebody out there, and it's just one person
Mm-hmm.
at a time with what we're doing. So this is about you and me connecting for a real conversation, as if nobody's really listening. Of course, we stay within some guidelines and not crush any companies
Mm-hmm.
out there or anything like that. But I love all of this because it's just fascinating for me. And I think there might be at least one person out there that might find the same thing, or somebody else
Mm-hmm.
that might say, yeah, that's cool, but that's not my thing. That's good. We got you thinking somewhat critically. And that's all that really matters, I think, is that we keep that alive as well when it comes to everything we talked about today. So, Marc Laplante, thank you for being here with me on CMMS Radio.
Thank you for inviting me. I hope I can come back, and hope I earned a return visit to your great program. Thank you.
I will talk to the producers and make sure that happens, my friend.
Awesome.
Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.